Show us what they teach you at the palace, tin soldier. Nathan Slade's smirk was loud enough to be heard across half the range. What those around him didn't know, however, was that the quiet man they were so casually mocking was no mere royal guard. This was Reed Marlo, a former SAS sniper, boasting more confirmed kills than most squads combined. And when his shot finally broke the air, the entire Yorkshire countryside fell utterly silent. Before we reveal what happened next, smash that like button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from today. Now, let's get into it. In early spring, the Yorkshire countryside holds a distinct scent, a unique blend of chalk dust mingling with diesel fumes from the access road, the fresh, damp aroma of cut grass, and that crisp, invigorating bite in the air that forces your lungs awake, whether you welcome it or not. Nestled within these rolling hills, the Horsesby Range Club appeared to have sprouted organically from the landscape. Its weathered stone and corrugated metal had borne witness to decades of rifle smoke and relentless rain. This was far from your average weekend shooting gallery. You wouldn't find plastic targets shaped like zombies here, nor rental counters peddling overpriced ammunition. This was a sanctuary for serious marksmen, wielding serious rifles. It was the kind of place where conversations were exchanged in low murmurs, and everyone seemed to understand everyone else's affairs without a single question needing to be asked. The club's car park served as a silent testament to its clientele. It was a collection of battered Land Rovers, their wheel wells caked with mud, and estate cars with discreet gun cases peeking through rear windows. Not a single vehicle among them seemed designed to impress. From a nondescript gray Honda, Reed Marlo emerged, moving with the casual ease of someone simply stepping out to buy groceries. In his mid-40s of average height, he possessed a compact build, clearly sculpted by years of carrying heavy tactical kit rather than hours in a gym. His attire was utterly unremarkable. Dark jeans, a plain black windbreaker, and worn leather boots that had evidently traversed more miles on foot than most people covered in their cars in a year. The only detail that might subtly draw attention was his understated bearing, not the rigid posture of a soldier on parade, but rather an innate economy of movement, a hallmark of someone exceptionally skilled at the art of survival. Inside the clubhouse, Reed signed in with a quiet efficiency, foregoing any small talk. He offered a concise nod to the range officer, a grizzled ex-sergeant who possessed the uncanny ability to discern a truly skilled shooter from 50 paces. Then, without fanfare, Reed quietly claimed Lane 8. While other marksmen around him were meticulously unpacking high-tech tactical cases brimming with carbon fiber and titanium, Reed simply unrolled a canvas rifle wrap that appeared older than some of the shooters themselves. From within, a true marvel emerged, a thing of understated beauty to anyone who understood its significance. This was the L-42A1, Britain's definitive answer to precision shooting from an era when men like Reed were navigating poppy fields and traversing mountain passes whose names most people couldn't even pronounce. Its wood stock, worn smooth by countless hands, its iron sights that had never demanded batteries or adjustments, and its metal bearing that unmistakable patina, spoke of a craftsmanship designed to endure for generations, not merely to impress civilians. Reed assembled the rifle with the same meticulous care other men might reserve for cherished family heirlooms, checking the bolt action once before gently laying it gently on the bench rest. Then, He did something that would have appeared peculiar to any observer. He simply sat there. He didn't fidget with equipment, didn't practice dry firing. Instead, he opened a steel thermos, poured tea into its cap, and watched the range flags flutter in the distance. Meanwhile, the center lanes were already a hive of activity. Nathan Slade had arrived as if he owned the entire establishment. Self-proclaimed ex-Royal Marine, he now ran some tactical training outfit, heavily reliant on YouTube videos and merchandise. He was a man of broad shoulders and an even broader mouth. His custom rifle likely costing more than most people's cars. He was the type who could effortlessly steer any conversation towards a vaguely military anecdote about something he'd supposedly done in some vaguely dangerous locale. "Right then, lads," Slade announced, to no one in particular, unzipping a case that could have easily housed a small piano. "Time to show these weekend warriors what proper fieldcraft looks like." His rifle, if your taste leaned towards intimidation, was a work of art. Matte, black everything, a scope that belonged on a telescope, a bipod, a suppressor, and enough tactical accessories to stock a small armory. He set it up with theatrical precision, ensuring everyone could see the custom engravings and manufacturer logos. It was then that his eyes landed on Reed. "Well, well," Slade chuckled, his voice carrying across 3 lanes. "Looks like someone's grandfather brought his war trophy." A few of the younger shooters glanced over, snickering. Reed remained impassive, merely sipping his tea and continuing to observe the wind patterns downrange, as if engrossed in a compelling book. This complete lack of reaction seemed to irk Slade more than any sharp comeback ever could. He was the kind of man who thrived on attention the way engines thrive on petrol, and being ignored was akin to running on an empty tank. "Tell me, mate," Slade called out louder now, "do they actually let you fire that thing, or is it just for the museum display?" More laughter erupted from the peanut gallery. Reed continued to watch the flags. At the far end of the bench line, however, an older man in a worn, waxed jacket looked up from his own rifle case. With a gray beard and steady hands that had clearly held more than just target rifles, his eyes missed nothing. He watched Reed for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to Slade with an expression that might have been concern. He had seen this scenario before, the loudmouth picking on the quiet professional, and he knew how it usually concluded. Slade was now in his element, hitting his stride. 3 perfect shots at 400 meters with his space-age equipment, each impact announced with a sharp ping of steel and a satisfied grunt. The small crowd around him steadily grew. Younger shooters drawn in by the potent combination of expensive gear and effortless confidence. He worked the crowd like a seasoned performer, elaborating on wind calculations and ballistic coefficients with the air of a man who had never encountered a technical detail he couldn't transform into a testament to his own expertise. "Of course it helps when you've done this for real," he said, cycling the bolt with unnecessary flair. "Not just standing around looking pretty for tourists." Another glance drifted towards Reed, who still hadn't touched his rifle, still hadn't reacted to any of the commentary, just sat there like a man waiting for a bus that would arrive precisely when it was supposed to. "I mean," Slade continued, playing to his audience, "fair play to the ceremonial lads. Takes discipline to stand still for hours. But this," he gestured towards his smoking barrel, "this takes a different kind of training altogether." One of the younger shooters, who couldn't have been older than 25, piped up, "Is he actually one of those guards with the funny hats?" "Has to be," another replied. Look at him. Probably polishes his boots 3 times a day. The laughter was growing more pointed now, less nervous. Slade had successfully turned Reed into the butt of a joke that was practically writing itself. The quiet man with the old rifle who didn't know he was outclassed. But the gray-bearded veteran wasn't laughing. He had closed his own rifle case and was watching the scene with the expression of a man observing someone walk onto thin ice, not worried exactly, just anticipating. Because Reed's stillness wasn't the stillness of a man being ignored. It was the stillness of a man choosing his moment. After nailing another tight cluster at 500 meters, Slade decided it was time to make his point more directly. He stood up, his rifle cradled across his forearms as if posing for a magazine cover, and turned towards Reed's lane. "All right then, Buckingham," he called out. "Since you've been sitting there soaking up all this professional instruction, how about a demonstration? Show us what they teach you in that palace of yours." Reed looked up for the first time since the commentary began. Not angry, not embarrassed, just mildly curious, as if someone had simply asked him the time. "I'm not here to compete," he said quietly. His voice carried despite its low volume. It was the kind of voice that didn't need to shout, because it was used to being obeyed the first time. Slade grinned wider. "Come on, mate. Don't be shy. 1 shot. Same distance I've been working. Let's see if ceremonial training translates to actual marksmanship." Reed returned to watching the wind flags. This non-response was clearly killing Slade. The crowd was starting to lose interest, some drifting back to their own lanes. Nothing deflated a showman quite like being ignored, and Slade could feel his audience slipping away. "Tell you what," he pressed, his voice getting sharper. "I'll even let you use a proper scope. Can't have you missing because your museum piece doesn't have any real sights." Still nothing from Reed. The gray-bearded man finally stood up and walked closer, positioning himself where he could see both shooters clearly. His movement was casual, but there was something in his posture that suggested he was getting ready for something. Slade tried one more time. "Look, I get it. Must be intimidating being around actual operators after years of standing around for selfies. But come on. Even the palace guard must have done some basic rifle training." Yeah. That's when Reed finally moved. He stood up slowly, checked his rifle's chamber with practiced efficiency, and stepped toward the firing line. "1 shot," he said, not looking at Slade. 700 meters iron sights." The casual conversation at nearby benches died away. Suddenly, everyone was paying attention again, but the mood had shifted. This didn't feel like entertainment anymore. It felt like something serious was about to happen. Reed moved into a prone position with the kind of fluid economy that comes from muscle memory carved by necessity. No wasted motion, no adjustment, just one smooth transition from standing to firing position that looked like it had been done 10,000 times, in places where getting it wrong meant more than embarrassment. He settled the rifle into his shoulder, checked the wind flags one more time, and went absolutely still. The range officer called out, 700-meter target is active. Steel silhouette. Reed didn't acknowledge him, didn't shift position, just lay there like he'd grown from the ground itself, breathing in a rhythm so controlled it was barely visible. Slade leaned forward, squinting downrange through his scope. "I can't even see the bloody target without optics," he muttered to someone nearby. "This should be interesting." But the gray-bearded veteran was watching Reed with a different expression entirely. Recognition, and something that might have been concern, Not for Reed, but for everyone else who was about to learn something they weren't ready for. Reed exhaled once, slow and controlled. The rifle cracked, a single, clean report that seemed to cut through the Yorkshire air like a blade. Half a second later, the distant steel sang out, a perfect ringing note that echoed off the hills behind the range, dead center. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause, like the whole countryside was holding its breath. The range officer raised his binoculars, adjusted the focus, looked again. "Direct hit," he said finally. "Center mass. 700 meters iron sights." Reed stood up, cleared his rifle with one smooth motion, and walked back to his bench like nothing had happened. He sat down, poured another cup of tea, and resumed watching the wind flags. Slade's jaw was hanging open. The crowd around him had gone completely silent. That's when the gray-bearded veteran stepped forward and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Reed Marlo," he said, nodding toward the quiet man with the teacup. "2 SAS reconnaissance troop, 4 tours, more confirmed kills than most squadrons combined." He paused, letting the words sink in. "That shot you just saw? That's him taking it easy." The silence stretched longer. Then someone whispered, "Jesus Christ," and suddenly everyone was looking at Reed Marlo. Not the ceremonial guard they'd been mocking, but the professional soldier who'd been sitting among them all along. Slade's expensive rifle suddenly looked very ordinary. Indeed, the atmosphere on the range had changed like weather before a storm. The easy banter died away, replaced by something heavier. Slade stood frozen by his bench, his high-tech rifle suddenly looking less impressive and more compensatory. Around him, the small crowd that had gathered to watch the show was dispersing quietly, some avoiding eye contact, others stealing glances at Reed like they were seeing him for the first time, which, in a way, they were. Reed finished his tea without hurry, rinsed the cup with water from his thermos, and began breaking down the L-42A1 with the same methodical care he'd shown assembling it. Each component was cleaned, checked, and fitted into the canvas wrap with the kind of attention you give to something that's kept you alive. A young lad, maybe 19 or 20 at most, approached the bench hesitantly. He had that eager look of someone who'd just realized he'd been in the presence of something rare and wasn't sure how to handle it. "Sir," he said quietly, "could I, that is, would you mind if I asked about the rifle?" Reed looked up, not unfriendly, just assessing. "What about it?" "It's an L-42, isn't it, from the 70s? I've read about them, but never seen one fired." The boy's voice was respectful now, none of the earlier mockery. "How do you range with iron sights at that distance?" Reed considered the question seriously. "You don't range, wind, distance, drop? It's all muscle memory after a while, like driving a car without thinking about the pedals." He paused, then added, "Of course, it helps when you've had proper training and proper motivation to get it right." The implication hung unspoken in the air. In the field, missing wasn't just embarrassing, it was fatal. More shooters were drifting over now, drawn by curiosity and something approaching reverence. Not the celebrity worship that had surrounded Slade earlier, but the quiet respect professionals show each other when rank and ego get stripped away. An older man with rifle club patches on his jacket cleared his throat. "Mind me asking what unit you were with, sir?" 22 SAS, Reed replied simply. "Reconnaissance troop mainly, some other things that aren't worth discussing." The gray-bearded veteran who'd identified him earlier stepped closer. Monsieur Henderson, he introduced himself. 3 para back in the day. Falklands, Northern Ireland. I thought I recognized the signature. Reed gave him a respectful nod. Good to meet you, Mac. Likewise. Henderson glanced around at the assembled shooters, then back to Reed. These lads don't know, do they? What that shot really was? Reed shrugged. Just a shot. Henderson smiled grimly. Just a shot. 700 meters, iron sights, cold barrel, unknown wind. In field conditions, that's the difference between mission success and body bags. The younger shooters were listening intently now, finally beginning to understand the gap between range practice and operational reality. The expensive scopes and tactical accessories suddenly seemed less important when faced with the simple fact of Reed's demonstration. Slade had been silent through all of this, standing apart from the growing group around Reed's bench. His face cycled through several expressions. Disbelief, embarrassment, something that might have been anger. Finally, he approached. Look, he said, his voice lower than before. I didn't know about your background. Reed looked up from securing his rifle case. No reason you should have. Still, Slade persisted. What I said earlier about ceremonial duty, about the palace thing, I was out of line. Reed studied him for a moment. You saw the uniform? Drew conclusions? Happens all the time. There was no malice in his voice, but no absolution either. Just a statement of fact. Slade shifted uncomfortably. So, you're really... you serve the Gedi Servo Nebubatya Daddy. Royal Guard is a posting, not a demotion, Reed explained patiently. Most of us rotate in from active units. Infantry, paras, Marines, Special Forces. Ceremony is just the visible part. Henderson nodded approvingly. People think it's all pomp and pageantry. Don't realize those lads are operational soldiers doing a different job for a while. Different job, same standards, Reed confirmed. You don't get posted to palace duties by looking pretty. You get there by being the kind of soldier who can be trusted with live ammunition around heads of state. The implications of that settled over the group like a cold realization. The toy soldiers they'd been joking about were actually some of the most thoroughly vetted military personnel in the country. One of the younger shooters spoke up quietly. So, when you're standing guard at Buckingham Palace, I'm an active-duty soldier with a loaded rifle, protecting the monarch. Reed finished matter-of-factly. Same as any other security posting, just with more tourists taking pictures. The range had grown quiet around them. Other shooters at distant benches were packing up their gear, the day's competitive atmosphere having evaporated into something more reflective. Slade's expensive demonstration had become an expensive lesson in assumptions. Reed closed his rifle case and stood, shouldering his kit bag. "Gentlemen," he said with a polite nod. As he turned to leave, Henderson called after him. "Reed, that shot, what was the actual range?" Reed paused. 750, near enough. Wind was tricky. The target was marked at 700. Reed shrugged. Range markers are approximate. I pace my own distances. And with that, he walked away, leaving behind a group of marksmen who were suddenly far less certain about what they thought they knew about shooting, soldiering, or the quiet professionals who did both for a living. The gravel crunched under Reed's boots as he made his way toward the car park, the L-42A1, secure in its canvas case, slung over one shoulder. Behind him, the range had settled into an unusual quiet, not the focused silence of concentration, but the contemplative hush that follows a moment of genuine education. He reached his Honda without ceremony, popped the boot, and laid the rifle case inside with the same careful attention he'd shown all day. No hurry, no fuss. Just the methodical actions of a man who'd learned that rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes led to consequences he'd rather not think about on a peaceful Yorkshire afternoon. The sound of footsteps on gravel made him glance up. It was the young lad who'd asked about the rifle, walking over with the hesitant gait of someone who wanted to say something but wasn't sure they should. "Sir," the boy called out when he was close enough, "I just wanted to say, well, thank you for the demonstration and for setting us straight about the guards." Reed nodded. "No need for thanks. Maybe just remember it next time you see someone in ceremony kit." "I will, sir." "Definitely." The boy paused, then added, "My grandfather was Tupara. He always said the loudest soldier in the room usually isn't the most dangerous one." That brought a faint smile to Reed's face. "Your grandfather was a wise man." As the boy walked back toward the clubhouse, Reed became aware of other eyes on him. Not staring exactly, but the kind of respectful observation soldiers give each other in recognition of shared understanding. Monsieur Henderson stood by the range office, smoking a cigarette and watching with approval. A few of the other shooters had gathered near their vehicles, talking in low voices that somehow managed to sound both animated and subdued. Only Slade remained at his bench, methodically cleaning his expensive rifle with movements that suggested his mind was elsewhere entirely. Reed closed the boot of his car and walked around to the driver's door. The afternoon was advancing toward evening, painting the Yorkshire hills in long shadows and golden light. In the distance, he could hear sheep calling to each other across stone walls older than his grandfather, and the faint rumble of a tractor working distant fields. Peace. The kind of deep, settled peace that you only really appreciated after you'd spent time in places where it didn't exist. He was about to get into the car when Monsieur Henderson approached, not hurrying, just walking over with the measured pace of a man who'd earned the right to speak his mind. "Reed," he said when he was close enough. "Good shooting today." "Thanks, Mac." Henderson took a long draw on his cigarette, exhaled slowly. "Been coming to this range for 15 years. Seen all sorts. Weekend warriors, competition shooters, ex-military, from every service you can name. But I've never seen anyone make a point quite like you did today." Reed shrugged. "Wasn't trying to make a point. Just took a shot." "Bollocks," Henderson said gently. "That was the most educational thing to happen at this range since I started coming here. Half those lads in there are going to go home tonight and think differently about service, about assumptions, about what real competence looks like when it doesn't need to advertise itself." Reed considered this. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Definitely not a bad thing. Henderson flicked his cigarette away and extended a hand. "It was an honor, mate." Genuinely. They shook hands briefly, firmly, with the understated respect of professionals who recognized each other across the boundaries of unit and service. Reed got into his car and started the engine. As he reversed out of the parking space, he could see through the rear window that several of the shooters had gathered around Henderson, no doubt pressing him for more details about what they'd witnessed. The old para was gesturing toward the distant targets, probably explaining the technical difficulty of what they'd seen. Good. Let them understand. Let them go home with a different perspective on the quiet professionals who served without needing recognition, who carried skills that couldn't be bought at any equipment shop, who wore ceremonial uniforms while remaining very real soldiers underneath. Reed turned out of the car park and onto the narrow country road that would take him back toward London, toward his flat, toward tomorrow's duty roster at the palace. In a few days, he'd put on the red tunic and bearskin cap, take post at one of the ceremonial gates, and stand perfectly still while tourists took photographs and made jokes about toy soldiers. And none of them would ever need to know that the quiet man holding the rifle was someone who'd learned his craft in mountains and deserts where missing meant more than embarrassment, which was exactly how it should be. Behind him, the Horsesby Range Club settled into evening quiet, the day's lessons absorbed into the Yorkshire countryside like rain soaking into ancient soil. Tomorrow would bring new shooters, new conversations, new demonstrations of skill and equipment. But today had been different. Today they'd learned the difference between talking about war and having been there. And that, Reed thought, as the familiar roads carried him home, was probably worth the price of ammunition.